Today I'm talking about the Catholic Church and specifically with reference to the catechisms and papal pronouncements and the SSPX. So, yeah, it's been a while since I spoke about the Catholic Church, and the last time I did it caused quite a bit of controversy. Some people were not happy, but then I do tackle all the difficult topics on the channel. And later this week, I want to talk about Martin Luther again, in that I've found a number of fascinating quotes by my favorite theologian, Martin Luther. And yeah, the question is, was Martin Luther dishonest or very dishonest? But it's definitely something between those two. So, yeah. Sorry, my ear's a little blocked. Okay, let me get this on the stream and we can discuss. So this is the SSPX. It's an offshoot, a breakaway from the Catholic Church. And they've got their own little internal issues going on. And what I want to do is provide an accurate representation of what is Catholic policy, Catholic doctrine, Catholic teaching. Whenever I read anything by Protestants, Protestant history, it's invariably dishonest. It's invariably misrepresentation. And this is a common thing. When we talk about Islam, we obviously try to be very clear and accurate about what it teaches. Of course, Muslims will deny that, but it's really inexcusable if Protestants misrepresent Catholic Church doctrine, Catholic Church history, and practice and distort it for their own agenda. So welcome, guys. Why attack the SSPX? Because the SSPX is, as far as I can determine, teaching very, very false doctrine. So welcome, Porfirio. Okay, so the parable of the wheat and the tares. Now, this is interesting, just as a background. While men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, "Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares?" He said to them, "An enemy has done this." The servants said to him, "Do you want us then to go and gather them up?" But he said, "No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them." Really interesting parable. Christ did say that the poor will always be with us. We're never going to solve the problem of poverty. There's always, I guess, a resource shortage, but also some people just aren't that bothered about doing productive work. Now, but this parable tells us that within the church, the field, both true believers, the wheat, and those who sow discord of false doctrine, this would be the tares, the heretics, the impostors, will coexist until the final judgment. You know, hello, Sergeant Grinch. Hi, Catherine. You know, I always get asked this question, and for some reason, I keep having to repeat this. I do this about, I don't know, 5 times a week. I get asked this question, and I have to explain to people whether I've done it in writing or whether I do it on the videos, but I am not Catholic. I am not Eastern Orthodox. What I do try and do is to present accurately the doctrine, the history, the quotations, the discussions within the church from an accurate historical and logical factual perspective. I had James Swan recently try to dismiss me as being, what did he call me? Functionally Catholic. No, I'm functionally logical. I'm functionally Aristotelian. I use the basic laws of logic and I stick to corroborated, verifiable history, as opposed to myths and lies, which seems to be the common lingua franca amongst folks who, yeah, on the Protestant side, as far as I can tell. So, anywho, right. So your heretics, your imposters will coexist with those who are truly Christian, I would assume, then until the final judgment. And the enemy, the devil, introduces the tares. Now the householder, in this case representing God or those in authority, the papacy, in its governing role, advises against immediate forceful removal of the tares, lest the good wheat be uprooted with them. So this implies then a very patient approach to dealing with error and schism, allowing for discernment and growth and reserving ultimate judgment for a later time, while recognizing the distinction between the two. Now, a point I should make is that when I talk about the Talmud, or when I talk about Jews, Jewish history, when I discuss anything from the Midrash and so on, then I'm accused of being a Jew. So when I discuss Catholicism, I'm accused of being a Catholic. So yeah, I guess that's not an honest way of discourse. It's really just a way to smear someone and dismiss them. Because when I discuss the Talmud and I go into detail on what the Talmud teaches or what Jewish doctrine is, then I didn't suddenly become Jewish. I'm just trying to be very honest about it and very accurate. Okay, now the communist infiltration of the priesthood. A few things to discuss here on Catholicism. This is Taylor Marshall's book, Infiltration, the plot to destroy the church from within. And from my analysis of it, it's pretty sloppy. It's definitely not the most well thought out analysis. That's my view. I have discussed this in the past, especially in relation to Ballard Dodd, I think her name is, who, as far as I can tell, made up a bunch of stories that she couldn't prove. So he will set up a counter church, which will be the ape of the church, because he, the devil, is the ape of God. It will have all the notes and characteristics of the church, but in reverse and emptied of its divine content. It will be a mystical body of the Antichrist that will, in all externals, resemble the mystical body of Christ. You look at Marxism, it's effectively a counterfeit of Catholic doctrine of the Catholic Church. In fact, he originally called his manifesto, it was called not the Communist Manifesto, but the Communist Catechism of the Faith, right? So clearly it was taken and derived from Catholicism. He was trying to make a fake religion. So this is Fulton Sheen, Communism and the Conscience of the West. And that was published in 1948. And this is taken from Taylor Marshall's Infiltration, chapter 9. Now, he also says to recognize and resist. Now, I think this one is too fuzzy and too loose. This could be very much like what Martin Luther did, justifying whatever they did in the name of recognize and resist. The Church acknowledges that there can be occasions where the faithful resist or have difficulty accepting certain magisterial teachings. However, the Church teaches that resistance, as a matter of principle, to the teaching of the magisterium is incompatible with the authentic sensus fidei. The faithful must make every effort to understand and accept the Church's teachings. So this is a matter of authority and the rejection of authority. For the record, I do find Taylor Marshall depressing, conspiratorial, and I do not believe a single word Ballard Dodd said. Now, the sensus fidei, let's define that. To these definitions, the assent of the Church can never be wanting on account of the activity of the same Holy Spirit, for which the whole flock of Christ is preserved and progresses in unity of faith. We don't see unity amongst Protestants. We see division, we see disagreement, we see contradiction. These are all errors. Now, of course, it's not something they want to openly discuss, but clearly these are not always nuanced positions or refinements. These are opposite doctrines. Take a look at Calvinism versus Arminianism. These are opposite teachings on the same topics. There are occasions, however, when the reception of magisterial teaching by the faithful meets with difficulty and resistance, and appropriate action on both sides is required. The faithful must reflect on the teachings that have been given, making every effort to understand and accept. Resistance, as a matter of principle, to the teaching of the magisterium is incompatible with the authentic sensus fidei. The magisterium must reflect on the teaching that has been given and consider whether it needs clarification or reformulation in order to communicate more effectively the essential message. That's from the document Sensus Fidei in the Life of the Church. Now, Vatican II. So I'm going to touch on a whole bunch of topics related to Catholicism here in the Catholic Church. It is ecumenical and binding, whether or not Catholics like it. Porfirio says the issue with the phrase recognize and resist is that it can be interpreted in many ways, one of which can be used in rebellion and disobedience against the law and legitimate commands. And that is exactly right. Thanks, Catherine. Thank God you're functionally logical. I do appreciate that. So, welcome everyone. So, ecumenical councils are the highest level assemblies and are those to which the bishops and others are entitled to vote and are convoked from the whole world under the presidency of the Pope or his legates, and the decrees of which, having received papal confirmation, bind all Christians. So, whether they like it or not, Catholics are bound by Vatican II. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia, volume 4. Ecumenical councils are assemblies of bishops representing the universal church as defined by the Catholic Encyclopedia. They are linked to the Pope, as there can be no such thing as an ecumenical council independent of or in opposition to the Pope. His action is what makes a council ecumenical, and his ex cathedra confirmation of its decisions makes them binding on the entire church. Pope John the 23rd explicitly stated that Vatican II's principal purpose was pastoral, to safeguard and present more effectively the sacred deposit of Christian doctrine, rather than to introduce or debate new dogma. Ex cathedra refers to the concept of the Pope as supreme teacher of the Catholic Church, making an infallible, definitive statement on a matter of faith or morals with the authority of his office, ensuring it binds the entire Church to accept it as truth, a process reserved for very rare declarations like the Immaculate Conception. Catherine, is Marshall the Catholic Jonathan Kahn or similar? A Christian rabbi writes about end times. I believe he's a former Anglican priest who became Catholic. And when I listen to him, the guy is always seems to be, I don't know, undermining the papacy, I know Francis certainly put his foot in his mouth as often as he could, but he was always undermining the papacy, always had some sort of dark, depressing thing to say that was very negative. So he's not the most, I don't know, he tends to turn people away from the authority of the Catholic Church. So what is a Catholic? Some key principles. You have to profess the Catholic faith, right? The Catechism states that these fully incorporated into the Catholic Church are those who, possessing the Spirit of Christ, are joined to the Church by the bonds of the profession of faith, the sacraments, ecclesiastical government, and communion. To be Catholic, you have to profess the fullness of the Catholic faith as handed down through Scripture and tradition. And then communion with the popes and bishops. The Directory for the Application of Principles and Norms in Ecumenism. Catholics hold that the firm conviction that the one Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church, which is governed by the successor of Peter and the bishops in communion with him. Therefore, be in communion with the Pope and the bishops in union with him. This will be relevant to the SSPX as they're not in full communion. Participation in the sacraments. Those fully incorporated in the Catholic Church are joined to the Church by the bonds of the sacraments. This is true. You cannot be Catholic yet reject Vatican II. It is an ecumenical council. Yes. So you must participate in the sacraments, especially baptism, the Eucharist, and confirmation. This is essential to being Catholic. And then fidelity to apostolic tradition. From the Catechism 248, the criterion that assures unity in the midst of plurality is fidelity to the apostolic tradition, that is, the communion in the faith and in the sacraments received from the apostles. So being Catholic means adhering to the fullness of the faith and sacraments as handed down. So it is not merely allegiance or adherence to a liturgical form like the Catholic Mass. Going to the Catholic Mass doesn't make you Catholic. That's just a liturgical form. It is one valid form of Catholic liturgy, but it is not a defining characteristic or the defining characteristic. So the SSPX, as far as I can tell, this is a very predatory group. The Church seeks unity with the SSPX, even as SSPX voices brand the Church antichrist, which is exactly the same that Protestants did, to offer true Roman Catholicity to Roman Catholics, often in the very same territories as standard Catholic parishes. Now, this headless network of wandering priests exploits Catholic sacramental life while corroding ecclesial authority and communion. Good intentions don't sanctify disobedience. They simply bring ruin. So Pius XII stated that bishops consecrated without apostolic mandate lack any legitimate jurisdiction, and that their sacramental acts are all illicit, even criminal and sacrilegious. And this is exactly what Archbishop Lefebvre did. Now, Pius XII was a very popular pope. He made it very plain what he thought of Lefebvre and actions like what SSPX is guilty of. Pius XI, 1922, warned of those who profess Catholic doctrine yet refuse the teachings and solemn pronouncements of the Holy See, a warning that includes the SSPX. Canon law locates the root of schism in withdrawal of submission to the Supreme Pontiff or from communion with the members of the Church subject to him. They stepped outside. So the Catechism teaches that such ruptures wound the unity of Christ's body, right? And by setting up parallel altars and also jurisdictions without papal mandate, the SSPX's claims to true Catholicity contradict the very marks of Catholic unity. They are, by the Catholic Church's definitions, they are outside of the faith, and therefore they don't have the same profession of faith, sacramental communion, and the hierarchical bond and with the popes and the bishops. Now, the power of jurisdiction, SSPX. So let's consider some of these issues right around the SSPX. I know this was for lots. At one point, I discussed this. This was really controversial, but the SSPX does not have a leg to stand on. So let me see if I've missed anything. Now, it is often heard that the priests of the Society of St. Pius X do not have jurisdiction, and that the bishops consecrated by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre do not claim any jurisdiction either. And then they say, in a way, now this is from the SSPX, this is from their own documentation, right? This is their own papers. Let me just bring this up, actually. Let me just bring up this source. Give me a second. This, you'll see here, District of the USA, Society of St. Pius X, validity of SSPX's confessions and marriages. This is from their own pages, right? Let's take that away. So they say, yeah, we don't have jurisdiction. And yet we know that the power of jurisdiction, and now they're going to explain why it doesn't matter. Now they're going to start doing lots of intense mangling of words. Yet we know that the power of jurisdiction over the penitent is required for the validity of absolutions, which is Canon 872, and that the ordinary canonical form of marriage requires the presence of an authorized priest, Canon 1094. Furthermore, without a canonical mission, which is an act of jurisdiction, a priest is not allowed to preach, Canon 1328. Authorization or delegation is as well required for performing a baptism, Canon 739, and also to take Holy Communion to the sick in a solemn manner, or to keep the Blessed Sacrament reserved in chapels, convents, schools, and churches, which are not parishes or attached to exempt religious houses. To perform funeral rites, to build a church, faculties are required by the cleric to be a legitimate minister of the sacramentals, Canon 1146. And the code maintains that a bishop can confirm licitly only his subjects upon whom he has ordinary jurisdiction. Nevertheless, our bishops confirm worldwide, our priests perform all the sacred actions, and traditional Catholics build churches and chapels where the Eucharistic Lord dwells permanently in his tabernacle. That's a very interesting empty claim. All this, needless to say, without the delegation of the diocesan prelate, and often very much against his will. So the SSPX, by their own words, are stating that they stand outside of the Catholic Church. They're not in communion, therefore they're in violation of basic Catholic law. It's as simple as that. They admit it in their own writings. They state it bluntly. So there are so many Catholics, there are so many even non-Catholics who weigh in on this one, but there's so many poorly educated Catholics who have no idea what's in their catechism or what the Catholic Church actually teaches, that want to make all sorts of false claims about it. The SSPX themselves are saying bluntly, we don't have jurisdiction. We do not have authority. We are in violation of Catholic law. Simple as that. Canon law being violated, admitted by the SSPX. Porfirio says the main issue is that Lefebvre acknowledged and recognized the post-Vatican II claimants to the papacy as true popes, but he chose to disobey their authority. Yeah, we'll get a lot into him. So the power of jurisdiction from the SSPX. So let us face the problem. The priests of the Society of St. Pius X do not have jurisdiction. It appears that the confessions they hear and the marriages they bless are invalid. And if they have no faculties, all the priestly work they perform is illegitimate and therefore evil. If this is so, it would be a sin to receive their services, maybe even to ask for them. If such is the case, the society is deceiving the good, traditional, Catholic faithful. And that's from the SSPX. Pope Pius XII says the following, and again, he's a very popular pope. Acts requiring the power of holy orders which are performed by ecclesiastics of this kind, though they are valid, as long as the consecration conferred on them was valid, are yet gravely illicit, that is, criminal and sacrilegious. To such conduct, the warning words of the divine teacher fittingly apply. He who enters not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbs up another way, is a thief and a robber. That's from Ad Apostolorum Principus, paragraph 41, written 1958. So, yeah, I mean, I think Pope Pius XII is pretty clear. We can see that there's a deep conflict here between the SSPX and the Papacy, the magisterium of the Catholic Church. They're in conflict. There is no way that you can say that, yes, these guys are 100%, everything is sorted. I've seen all sorts of false claims along that line made, but no, it doesn't stand. So while acts performed by ecclesiastics like the SSPX may be valid due to their valid consecration, they are gravely illicit, that is, criminal and sacrilegious. The Pope cites the words of Christ, "He who climbs up another way is a thief and a robber," to condemn the actions of those who have assumed ecclesiastical office without proper authority. They do not have the sanction of the Pope. These are invalid episcopal elections and consecrations. So, interesting, just a side note here, I'll just briefly touch on communism. This is Ad Apostolorum Principis, encyclical of Pope Pius XII on communism and the church in China. And it says here, "The sheep indeed know the true shepherd's voice, but a stranger they will not follow, but will flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers." Now, this is an article that I discovered, Turbulent Priests, Solidarity Groups, Councils, and Theology in Post-Vatican II Germany. Just an interesting side note. The Social Democratic Party of Germany, the SPD, and the leader Kurt Schumacher, has a different name, Karl as well if you look it up, and he famously and polemically called the Catholic Church the fifth occupation force in Germany, and the Protestant theologian Martin Niemöller commented that the Federal Republic of Germany, formerly West Germany, had been conceived in Rome and born in Washington. Interesting that this political party and these people have this, shall we say, demeaning conspiratorial view of their own country, but also obviously within the Catholic Church. The SPD was founded in 1875 from a merger of smaller socialist parties. Yeah, this just gets better and better, and grew rapidly after the lifting of Germany's repressive anti-socialist laws to become the largest socialist party in Western Europe until 1933. Guess which socialist party became larger? You would call them the National Socialists, headed by a guy with a little mustache. And in 1891, it adopted its Marxist-influenced Erfurt program. So yeah, even the SPD doesn't have a very solid historical background, so you might want to think about voting for them. Or think about not voting for them. All right. Ignatius says, the SSPX is almost trying to redefine Catholicism as Latin Mass while throwing out the magisterium. Yes. So, SSPX doctrinal issues. Acceptance of the Second Vatican Council and the post-conciliar magisterium of the popes, Pope Benedict XVI in 2009. The problems now to be addressed are essentially doctrinal in nature and concern the acceptance of the Second Vatican Council and the post-conciliar magisterium of the popes. This is in reference to the SSPX. So I want to bring up all of these things to show people that, look, even the popes are saying, here's what they're saying. We still need to sort out various problems with the SSPX. They reject the teachings and authority of the Second Vatican Council. That means if they are not willing to accept these ecumenical councils, then they're not within the Catholic Church. They're in violation. Pope Benedict XVI notes that the SSPX has some reservations in the area of obedience to his authority. Full communion requires acceptance of the Pope's teaching authority. And relationship between the Church and other religions and cultures, the 2008 address by Pope Benedict indicates that the SSPX had disagreements with the Church's teachings on the relationship between the Catholic Church and other religions, as expressed in documents like Dignitatis Humanae. And of course, I mean, I had someone comment to me today about just the standard polemical line, but Pope Francis said this, or but the Catholic Church did that, but the Pope, it was 99% garbage, propaganda, falsehood, etc., exaggerations, and so on. And I did address that, and actually I've been thinking of doing a talk on exactly those topics. So Catherine says, the poisonous weeds were not cut out of the garden and overgrown the church. The tares won. I mean, no, but you've got to look at it in terms of, if you take the promise in the gospel seriously, the gates that Jesus Christ founds his church, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now, these are human organizations. They may be divinely inspired, they may be divinely led, but they're still human organizations. They make human errors. Ultimately, they will find their way back to the truth or the way back to the light, but you're going to suffer consequences from people's actions. People are going to deceive, people are going to undermine, people are going to mislead. These things happen. You're going to, but the organization, think of it this way: you have a ship. You might have a bad captain who's a complete drunk, but you don't jump off onto a life raft and then claim that this is the same ship. This is the true ship. No, you just replace the captain. Eventually, the captain dies, or the captain gets kicked out, or whatever the case might be. But that boat remains the same. The Catholic Church remains the Catholic Church. Sometimes there's a complete idiot in charge. That said, I was thinking tomorrow to talk about Martin Luther again. I've come across some very interesting, juicy quotes by this complete fool. And yeah, let's just say clearly the man has a rather high concept of himself and held himself far above all of the early church fathers. In fact, he dismissed them completely and held his opinion to be far superior to anything in the early church. And that's worth discussing, to look at, yeah, just how wrong people can be. But I don't think the Tears have won. The battle's not over yet. There's a fight, certainly, but the church still survives, maybe limping along. It's still there. But yeah, I can go through Sola Scriptura tomorrow as comparison, and you can see just how off base, just how far off the beaten track, just how false and wrong the arguments, the claims, the history of Martin Luther is, and thereby the Reformation as a movement based on extreme falsehood. So, okay, but moving on. The SSPX denies reality. So the Sacred Congregation, the Dicastery for Bishops, 1 July 1988. And what do they tell us? Having taken into account all the juridical effects, I declare that the above-mentioned Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre and Bernard Fillet, Bernard Tissier de Malaret, Richard Williamson, and Alfonso de Galarreta have incurred excommunication. Now, I've had plenty of Catholics, even AIs, telling me, well, actually, they were not, Lefebvre was not excommunicated. He's fine. He's a valid, no. The standard narrative is often so widespread that AIs just absorb it as truth and don't actually dig further, don't actually dig deeper. But these priests were all excommunicated, right? This is clear from the statement from the papacy, from the Catholic Church. Now, later on, the 4 priests were reinstated, but not Lefebvre, right? So they incurred ipso facto excommunication reserved to the Apostolic See. The Pope himself excommunicated Lefebvre and the 4 bishops that he instituted, right? Well, that's probably not the right word, but yeah. The priests and the faithful are warned not to support the schism of Monsignor Lefebvre. I've had many Catholics claim there was no schism. There is no state of schism. They're not in schism. Man, it says there right there. Do not support the schism of Monsignor Lefebvre. Otherwise, you too, as a bad Catholic, will incur ipso facto the very grave penalty of excommunication. So welcome, Daniel Król. Dzień dobry. Dobry wieczór. And let me see. Philip, there are more other priests in the total offering, the TLM. Yeah, in total offering, the TLM. Yeah. Well, it's just another form of the liturgy, right? It's a valid form of the liturgy. It's not the definitive factor in what is Catholic. It's just one option, right? Yeah, Paul said wolves would come into the church. It was never going to be smooth sailing, but we were promised the ship would never sink. Correct. Yeah, AIs can be so badly wrong. It's crazy. Porfirio says, just because a cleric celebrates the Latin Mass and wears beautiful vestments does not make them holier or Orthodox or even traditional. Yeah, I mean, you can go to the, actually, let me try and bring up something here. Let me bring up a totally false church started by Aleister Crowley. Let's go look at the Gnostic Catholic Church and let me see if we can find pictures. So these are pictures of the Gnostic Catholic Church, right? This is the Gnostic Catholic Church. They try to be legitimately Catholic, but they're faking it as well. They're trying to just fake their way through, trying to pretend. So yeah, you get, I mean, if you listen to the services, the Gnostic Catholic Union, if you listen to their services, it's going to take you a while to figure out they're not actually Christian. It's going to take you a while. Once you listen to their sermons, you go like something's weird, but I can't define it. It takes about 5 minutes to figure it out, at least. Okay, now, there is no dispute that the episcopal consecrations took place without a pontifical mandate. So these consecrations of these 4 bishops that Lefebvre consecrated took place without a mandate from the Pope. It was in violation of the Pope's direct wishes. Yeah, Father Aleister Crowley, exactly. He started the Gnostic Catholic Church. Everybody wants to copy the Catholic Church. Everybody wants to be the Catholic Church, right? So there is no dispute that the episcopal consecrations took place without a mandate from the Pope. It is without the Pope's permission, and indeed against his wishes. Canon 1382 states that a bishop who consecrates another without a papal mandate incurs excommunication. For the Catholics out there who don't understand their own church canon law, please just read what's on the screen and understand it. These are very simple words, okay? This is coming from the Catholic Church. Lefebvre was excommunicated, period, done. There's not even a discussion. And the priest who allows himself to be consecrated a bishop incurs it as well. Excommunication is of 2 types, latae sentiente and ferende sentiente. The first type is often called automatic. So they were automatically given excommunication. And the delinquent incurs it by simply committing the offense specified in the law. So, and this is from Schism and Monsignor Lefebvre. Actually, hold on, let me just get to the link here. Let me just bring it up. Okay, sorry, my bad. This is from Society of St. Pius X, District of Asia, my bad. Yeah, so this is from the SSPX themselves, okay? The same voices, so let me see. Have been excommunicated for schism. There is no dispute that they took place without a mandate, without the Pope's permission. So it is blunt. It is very, very blunt. Okay? So, right, 1917, Benedict XV, Code of Canon Law, Canon 1325. And in 1983, you're looking at 209, 751, and 755. The faithful of Christ are bound to profess their faith whenever their silence, evasiveness, or manner of acting encompasses an implied denial of the faith, which is the opposite of Islamic taqiyya, right? Contempt for religion or injury to God or scandal for a neighbor. After the reception of baptism, if anyone retaining the name Christian pertinaciously denies or doubts something to be believed from the truth of the divine and the Catholic faith, such a one is a heretic. If he completely turns away from the Christian faith, such a one is an apostate. If finally he refuses to be under the supreme pontiff or refuses communion with the members of the church subject to him, he is a schismatic. Let Catholics beware lest they have debates or conferences, especially public ones, with non-Catholics, without having come to the Holy See, or if the case is urgent, to the local ordinary. So that's the Pio Benedictine law. Mike Smell, I published the stream around 4:30ish, something like that. So 2.5 hours before. I wasn't really planning to do one. But yeah, maybe YouTube. Look, YouTube's been hammering my channel lately again. It goes through phases. I go through phases where I get lots of views, and then but of course, for the last couple of years, I've had serious suppression of my growth numbers. I used to get like 1,000, 1,400 or more subs a month, and it suddenly dropped to about 140. And this last month, it went backwards. I had minus 11. So, and I mean, I had apparently zero growth, like literally zero. I actually went backwards. And YouTube does that. There's certain topics it doesn't like me discussing, covering, and so on. And then it's just started to grow again a little bit. So, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, like YouTube suppresses the channel for whatever reasons. There are these ups and downs. And sometimes it doesn't inform people. And also it just unsubscribes people. That's just how it goes. So while I have a lot of sympathy, Oeretic says, to the SSPX positions regarding issues with the new liturgy and Vatican II positions, As I came to many similar issues, I never agreed with how far they went. Yep, fair enough. Okay, so in the Summa Theologia, Thomas Aquinas defines schism. Schismatics are those who refuse to submit to the pontiff and to hold communion with those members of the church who acknowledge his supremacy. And priests should not incur the sin of schism. SSPX routinely invokes some kind of higher law, right? They downgrade papal authority or they reinterpret clear statements. And in the Code of Canon Law, this is stated regarding consecration of bishops. Canon 1382 states that a bishop who consecrates someone as a bishop without a pontifical mandate and the person receives it both incur automatic excommunication. So he's not only schismatic, Lefebvre, not only schismatic, but also then was excommunicated. The canon establishes that the consecration of a bishop requires specific mandate or authorization from the Pope, which he did not have, and that this I've covered in the past, and I will again. So consecrating a bishop without this mandate results in the consecrating bishop and those being consecrated excommunicated, which can only be lifted by the Pope. The purpose of this canon is to uphold the authority of the Pope over the appointment of bishops, which is an important aspect of the Church's hierarchical structure and the Pope's role as supreme pastor of the universal Church. That's the Code of Canon Law, 1382, and that's the link here, Vatican VA Archive Code Juris Canonic CSE Index in.html. Okay, talking about Islam is highly forbidden nowadays. Yeah, there is that. I mean, so yeah, but seriously, the last couple of months, my channel took my channel took a beating. Honestly, YouTube just insane. I mean, I was just losing subscribers like crazy. You can just see YouTube deleting them. I can refresh the page and boop, you can see a few more gone. Refresh the page a few minutes later, more. You just see the subs went backwards. Crazy stuff. So, Pope Paul VI, the consistory on May 24, 1976. On the one hand, here are those who, under the pretext of greater fidelity to the Church and magisterium, systematically reject the teachings of the Council itself, its application and the resulting reforms, its gradual application by the Apostolic See, and of the episcopal conferences under our authority willed by Christ. Discredit is discredited on the authority of the Church in the name of a tradition, because the Church doesn't, 100% only have the old Catholic Latin Mass, right? Of which respect is attested only materially and verbally. The faithful distance themselves from the bonds of obedience to the See of Peter as to their legitimate bishops. The authority of today is rejected in the name of that of yesterday. So the authority, that's a typo there, sorry. The authority of today is rejected. So in other words, church authority is rejected because the Catholic Church apparently stopped doing things in the early 60s. And you can only be loyal to the early 60s church. Few people are aware that there's actually an older Catholic Church, right? I don't know what they call themselves. They call themselves the original Catholics or the old Catholics and so on. In fact, there were splits even within the Orthodox. There's the old Orthodox. I actually went to they've actually got a church up north, and I actually went there. It's now a museum, really, and it's a very pretty little church, and there's only a few people that actually belong there. It's just a family that's looking after it. It's like 3 or 4 people. And these people split. So there were a group who split over Vatican I. And so they left the Catholic Church over Vatican I. Over, again, another ecumenical council held with the Orthodox, another group of Orthodox left, and they became the old Orthodox or whatever, right? So Vatican I also caused the schism, and people buggered off. Vatican II, more people buggered off. It's not new. This is nothing new and nothing fresh, right? Because then maybe the SSPX should adhere to whatever was before caused the split with the old Catholics. I don't know. And the fact is all the more serious since the opposition we are talking about is not only encouraged by priests, but headed by a bishop. However, always venerated by us, Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre. It is so painful to notice it, but how can we not see in his attitude, whatever the intentions of these people may be, they placed themselves outside of obedience and communion with the successor of Peter and therefore the Church. You've got Pope Paul VI stating bluntly Lefebvre is outside of communion with the Church and the Pope. That's why I covered in the beginning what it requires to be a Catholic. According to Catholic canon, he is no longer Catholic. Lefebvre is outside of the Church. He's schismatic, he is excommunicated, and he's outside of communion. Since this, unfortunately, is the logical consequence, that is when argued that it is preferable to disobey It is better to disobey on the pretext of keeping one's faith intact. What did I say? Was that what was his name? Let me just get his name again. Roy Waves asked, "Am I Jewish?" Like seriously, why didn't you ask if I'm Martian next? What is this? Taylor Marshall, yeah, Taylor Marshall. Remember, Taylor Marshall said, you need to resist, recognize and resist. It's like for instance, I mean, if you look at what the shooter did with Charlie Kirk, he recognized and resisted. That's all it is. Antifa just recognize and resist. They're legitimate. Their cause is just. They are just recognizing and resisting. I mean, if you look at trans and furries, they're just recognizing and resisting the fact that they're being oppressed into having a single sexual binary. It's just recognize and resist. And I think it's really easy to take this recognize and resist mantra way too far. So this is the logical consequence. That is, when it is argued, it is preferable to disobey on the pretext of keeping one's faith intact, of working in one's own way for the preservation of the Catholic Church. But this is the Catholic Church as you visualize it, just like Martin Luther created a church the way he felt it should be. I mean, I could go through Martin Luther's writings. I've been reading through his works, and I put together some stuff. I mean, it's hard to read just how self-absorbed and how badly argued Martin Luther's positions are, and and to see statements that are made by apologists today who tell me they're being original, and we can trace them back to Martin Luther himself. The same things he said. They say, no, I'm being original. I'm just following the Bible. I didn't follow Martin Luther. But when I go through this talk tomorrow, you're going to see that you are repeating Martin Luther. He's got his hand up your ass and he's moving your lips for you, just like that. It's crazy stuff. We'll see that tomorrow. But working in one's own way for the preservation of the Catholic Church while denying it effective obedience, and it is said openly. We dare to say that the Second Vatican Council is not binding, that faith would also be in danger because of the post-conciliar reforms and orientations which one has the duty to disobey in order to preserve certain traditions, like the Latin Mass. What traditions? Now, this is a quote from SSPX here. We dare to say the Second Vatican Council is not binding, that faith would be in danger. That's what Martin Luther used to say, very similar to the kind of things he said. And what I've heard Catholics themselves say. And of course, Lefebvre was excommunicated. So where do Catholics stand on this? If you take the same position, you are running the same gauntlet. What traditions? It is this group, and not the Pope, not the Episcopal College, not the Ecumenical Council, that establishes which of the innumerable traditions must be considered as a norm of faith. Johnny Average doesn't make that decision. It doesn't fall to him. So let me see. When you quote this higher law, because it's in code of canon law, what higher law? Not certain which higher law we're speaking of. Let me see. Micah says, Saint Optatus of Malevis against the Donatists, specifically Book 2. Not familiar with that. Sorry, missing the context. People have schismed away from the church after almost each council, I think, like the Arians at Nicaea, for example, the First Ecumenical Council. Yeah. Nicole says, thank you for covering this. A rival of mine goes to solely SSPX masses and believes the Catholic Church is the anti-church. He calls himself a realist. This is laughable. And it is, because I've covered before how the argument made by the reformers was that Pope, I think Leo X, at the time of Martin Luther, was the Antichrist, not an Antichrist, not one of many. He was the Antichrist, spoken of in the Bible, spoken of in Revelation, the Antichrist. And he was going to bring the end times, and Revelation was never happened. There's been about 160 popes since then, and nothing's happened. So, so I think a prophecy or claim that is false 160 times it's just a lie that someone needs to stop. The problem is that this claim of being the Antichrist, of being the anti-church, or being the Church of Satan, etc., this is actually literally written into various Protestant confessions, like Westminster, Augsburg. It's written in those confessions that the Pope is the Antichrist. So therefore, the Catholic Church is the church who's going to bring the end times, the church of evil. That means Protestants are taught this. At some point, they've got to admit that, look, man, we're just lying. We are repeat serial liars. We are repeat serial offenders. Because seriously, I don't know when the end of times has come, but it's happened 160 times already, because every single pope, according to these confessions, is the Antichrist. Not an Antichrist, the Antichrist. You can only be wrong so long before you just, I mean, it's just retarded and stupid. Nicole further says, I've heard it said the devil can cloak himself in the good virtues like an angel of light because he can't be obedient. And I would agree with you. There's a lot to be said there. Tomorrow I'll be talking about Martin Luther, and I mean, you'll read just how retarded this man was. I mean, I've done hundreds of pages and dozens of hours on Martin Luther, and he's a gift that just doesn't stop giving. I've got so much more material to cover on that retard of a man. Law that SSPX claim is based on their actions. I'm not quite following you. If you can be a bit more verbose on that. It's also insane to hear many people who call themselves traditionalists who say that the Pope only spoke ex cathedra twice. Therefore, they don't need to follow Vatican II. Yeah, I mean, I've seen Catholics say lots of fascinating things that are complete garbage. I mean, I've been called a liar for quoting the Catholic Catechism. I've been called a liar to my face. I've been told I don't know what I'm talking about when I'm actually quoting multiple popes, multiple Vatican pronouncements from the Magisterium and the Catechism. But apparently, I'm just making things up. Okay, so let's continue. As you see, our venerable brothers, this attitude stands as the judge of that divine will, which established him as guarantor and custodian of the deposit of faith. In other words, these are people standing in judgment of the Pope, who is the supreme pastor of the Catholic Church. But now you've got these people who are saying, well, we stand here as judges of the Pope. Martin Luther did the very same. The true church is identified by its apostolic origin and the continuity of teaching with that of the apostles. The Catechism of the Council of Trent states that the true church can be recognized by its origin, which can be traced back to the apostles, and its doctrine being the same as that taught from the time of the apostles. Of course, I have covered extensively how for 200 years, Protestants were unable to prove any kind of apostolicity within their denominations. And eventually they just gave up because they either fabricated claims or they traced their way to heretics and well-known Gnostics. We're talking explicitly anti-Christian Gnostics. And these all fizzled out in the 11th, 12th century. And they could not. And eventually they stopped in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century. They changed their argument to say, but we're biblical. They couldn't prove any kind of apostolic lineage. So the claim was, but we're biblical. So, yeah, they can't agree, they contradict, but biblical. The Catholic Encyclopedia on Apostolicity explains that the Church is called apostolic because it was founded by Christ upon the apostles, and the apostolicity of doctrine and mission is necessary for the true Church. So, apostolicity of doctrine and mission, guided by their successors, the Pope and the College of Bishops. Let's look at Pius XII. Only the Pope confirms bishops. A vicar of Christ cannot be the Antichrist. If you acknowledge the man who sits on the throne of Peter as the representative of Christ, you can't say he's the son of perdition. Yeah, that's also true. And that is very true, Joel. They did keep turning to heretics of old. That's a simple fact. Yeah, it's an undeniable fact there. Okay, now, the Council of Trent declared, if anyone saith that bishops who have neither been rightly ordained nor sent by ecclesiastical and canonical power, but come from elsewhere, are lawful ministers of the word and of the sacraments, let him be anathema. I think that's pretty blunt. So the SSPX's jurisdiction is invalid. Pius XII teaches that bishops without canonical missions have no authority to even teach in the church, much less administer the sacraments or exercise powers of governance. Granted this exception, it follows that bishops who have been neither named nor confirmed by the Pope, but who, on the contrary, have been elected and consecrated in defiance of its express orders. And we will come to sections where the Pope bluntly, in letters written back and forth with Lefebvre, they've said, you have done this in defiance. I've already covered some of that, but you've done this in defiance. And the SSPX, yeah, we did. And what are you going to do about it? And the Pope says, so therefore they are outside of the church. They've violated those norms, right? Those who have been elected nor consecrated in defiance of its express orders enjoy no powers of teaching or of jurisdiction, since jurisdiction passes to bishops only through the Roman pontiff, as we admonished in the encyclical letter Mystici Corporis. Pius XII then says, Acts requiring the power of holy orders which are performed by ecclesiastics of this kind, although they are valid as long as the consecration confirmed on them was valid, are yet gravely illicit, that is, criminal and sacrilegious. To such conduct, the warning, I already covered that, you're a thief and a robber, you've climbed in through the window through a different way, right? There's necessity for clergy to have canonical mission. It is not simply a matter of ecclesiastical law, but of divine law. The SSPX, in its own words, is not above divine law. It too is bound to obey it. But these are men that are prideful. The SSPX rejects the divine law which clergy to be sent by ecclesiastical and canonical power. They are outside the church, therefore they are outside of the apostolic lineage. Therefore, what they do is not valid in the correct sense. Pope Paul VI says to Lefebvre, a single bishop without a canonical mission does not have the faculty of deciding in general what the rule of faith is or of determining what tradition is. He then tells me, in practice, you are claiming that you alone are the judge of what tradition embraces. In other words, yeah, but only the Latin Mass is valid and anything else is not. And Pope Paul VI is saying, sorry, buddy, but that's not the case. You say that you are subject to the church and faithful to tradition by the sole fact that you obey certain norms of the past that were decreed by the predecessor of him to whom God has today conferred the powers given to Peter. That is to say, on this point also, the concept of tradition which you invoke is distorted. So he's saying, but hold on, you want to hold to one tradition but reject other traditions. I am the new Pope. And of course, I will cover it later, but there are many Catholics that go, but hold on, but when something has been said, it cannot be undone by another Pope. And yeah, apparently, again, these Catholics need to sit down and do a little bit of reading of history and maybe a little bit of canon law and so on, and understand that the Pope is empowered to do these things. But that was written October 11, 1976. One thing I can say, SSPX, when you watch their videos, those guys are excellent. They speak really well. They're fantastic with their rhetoric, and the whole PR is superb. I mean, they're excellent. Okay. If you do want to learn about the SSPX and the Sedevacantists, right, and all of these guys, what you got to watch the Diamond Brothers, I think. These are the Sedevacantist guys and the SSPX guys. Watch the videos, the polemical videos against each other. The videos are fantastic. The way they highlight the errors, the flaws, the historical stuff. I mean, it is fantastic how they show the errors. But of course, neither of them sees their own errors. Neither wants to acknowledge their own errors. But the videos of these two warring camps is fantastic in how they highlight each flaw and each individual problem. Really well laid out. Note, it is not necessary for a schismatic to deny that the Pope has authority over him. Schism is the refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff. A person who refuses to submit to the authority of the Pope while believing him to possess authority in the matter of dispute is a schismatic. So the SSPX are not Sedevacantists, if I recall, not correctly so. But then again, some of them may well be. It's a bit of a gray area possibly, right? But technically, they were not Sedevacantists. They just didn't submit, right? If his refusal of submission constitutes an attack on the unity of the church, it is this matter of an attack on the unity of the church which is the real key to the idea of schism. If one looks at schismatics throughout the history of the church, one finds that they may not have the direct intention of breaking with the church. What they want to do is see the church come to their point of view. And we can go to Martin Luther and any number of reformers. They want the church to do what they say, to follow what they believe is right? And in this case, these people want the church to do what they believe to represent Catholic tradition. If you look at the Jansenists and the old Roman Catholics, what is indeed at issue is the question which must be truly called fundamental, of your clearly proclaimed refusal to recognize in its whole the authority of the Second Vatican Council and that of the Pope. This refusal is accompanied by an action that is oriented towards propagating and organizing what must indeed, unfortunately, be called a rebellion. That's the letter of Pope Paul VI to Archbishop Lefebvre, 11th October 1976. Let me just bring this up here. So you can go to the Holy See. That's the website here, vatican.va, and you can go to all of these letters and you can look up all of these things. So I have to do some reading through that. But yeah, you can go to the Holy See, Pope Paul VI, Vatican.va. You can look that up. So, any questions or thoughts so far? I mean, I think we're seeing that here. I haven't gone into huge depth on all of what the SSPX has to say, but I'm presenting this as the Catholic position. These are documents. There's plenty to do and see here. One says, Canon 1752, canonical equities to be observed in the salvation of souls, which must always be the supreme law in the church to be kept before one's eyes. Okay. If only the Pope can confirm bishops, does that mean that bishops in the Orthodox churches are invalid, or is it only for the SSPX? I mean, the SSPX claims still to be Catholic, right? The Orthodox Church has a different moniker, a different title, Orthodox, but do they still claim to be Catholic? I know, for instance, I covered Javier Perdomo the other day, and he's Lutherans, and I mean, apparently they called themselves back in the day evangelical Catholics, right? That is apparently the title that he just spoke about recently, and they claim to be the original Catholics. And of course, the Orthodox claim to be the original Catholics, the original church, and that the Catholics split from them. And it's all sorts of bending over backwards and twisting of facts. But that means that if one accepts the Catholic point of view that one has to be in communion with the Pope as part of the apostolic lineage, then anyone outside of that apostolic lineage, which is everyone is not Catholic, is not necessarily valid, right? There's an issue there. There's an error there, at the very least, that should be thought of. Let me just go through these questions. Conociendo el Islam, shalom, I'm late and missed some parts. What do I miss? The beginning, but you can always go back, play it at 1.75 speed and listen, or 1.5. That's what I do. Let me see what I've missed. Porfirio said, the bishops of the SSPX and Orthodox are valid, but they are illicit. Yes, the consecration was valid. The consecration is properly and correctly done, but what they're doing is illicit, because while they went through the actions correctly, it's like, imagine you steal milk, eggs, sugar, and stuff from a store, and then you go make a cake, right? The cake you made is valid. It's a good cake. It's perfectly good cake, but it's illicit because it's stolen goods. You stole it. So while it's a good cake, it's correctly made, it's illicit. It's stolen goods. Yeah, there's a bit of a difference there, distinction. SSPX is not outside the church now. Removed excommunication, and Francis gave them right to make confessions. I did say that at the very beginning. I raised that point at the very beginning, that the 4 bishops had their excommunication lifted, but not Lefebvre. Lefebvre is still excommunicated. His was not removed. Byron Noib says the liturgy with Protestant Jewish input through Vatican II was heavily stripped. George removed exorcism, prayers, and baptism. Many changes were made, modern infiltration. Look, first of all, I don't know. That's a lot of claims, and I'm not here to discuss Vatican II at length. I actually have a presentation I've been working on in Vatican II. But first of all, the claims that people constantly make, I watch a lot of Protestant stuff on the Catholic Church, and then I go back and do the research. I go and check. It's 99% lies, propaganda, distortions, misrepresentations, and I'm not going to take anything at face value. Ballard Dodd was lying through her teeth, as far as I can tell. I'm just making stuff up. There was another communist, former communist who left, who with Bishop Sheen came back into the Catholic Church, and Ballard Dodd and this guy did not agree on anything. Apparently they had screaming matches, or at least a screaming match in disagreement. Ballard Dodd provided exactly 0 proof of any of her claims. I mean, 0, nothing, nada, nothing at all. Ballard Dodd didn't prove a single word she said. I'd love to see some, but yeah, all she did was, possibly she was a plant by the communists, and her job was purely to create suspicion. Maybe her job was to create suspicion in the minds of people, and that suspicion was properly planted, and it exists today. But she gave exactly 0 proof of anything, right? So, yeah. So therefore, I'm very unwilling to believe anything that's just said off the cuff like this. Of course, modernist infiltration is going to happen. Of course, communists are going to infiltrate everything. They're going to try and infiltrate the government, the police. Look at the UK. The woke have clearly infiltrated everywhere. And of course, they're going to infiltrate anything and everything, right? We can see how many Protestant churches are having gay marriages, gay weddings, gay this, gay that, woke the other. Yeah, it happens. It certainly does happen. But also don't want to exaggerate, what that is. And I also don't think that a lot of the claims against the Catholic Church here are reliable. I'd say they're largely exaggerated. Okay, let me see. The Masonic blueprint and the Alta Vendita. The SSPX are not preserving what is holy. The SSPX are making up their own thing. The SSPX are clearly outside of the church. You can say that a bad person got into the church. That would be a claim you would have to prove, but that is still the church. You could have, let's take a supermarket, Target. Let's say that someone from another supermarket chain, Walmart, got into Target. That doesn't make Target not Target. It just means a Walmart guy is now a spy inside of Target. And now the guy's trying to do things. So at some point he'll leave, he'll be discovered, he'll be kicked out. Maybe he becomes CEO. The Walmart guy becomes the CEO of Target and he messes with Target. At some point he'll die. At some point he'll be replaced. But that is still Target. The point is that is Target. And to then flee and then start a new store and say, but we're Target now. No, you're not Target. Target's still over there. Target's right over there. There's the buildings. There's the people. There's the management. You see, you are conflating dishonestly management with the institution. The institution is still very much there. The management will be sorted out. But then also you've got to ask yourself, why did the Walmart guy, why are these guys so dishonest? Why are they doing dishonest things, right? And then of course the other guys who are claiming, but we are this now and we're that now. No, they clearly have violated canon law that goes back centuries, goes back to the foundation of the Catholic Church. They are violating not only canon law, but also divine law. So no, I think no. So yeah, enough of your conspiracy theories and poor takes. So yeah, or says they see themselves as the true universal church, and the Romans the one that split. Yeah, I've listened very carefully. I've looked at the history of the Orthodox. I don't buy a word of it, not a word. So, okay, so Byron, you clearly, I know you're going to claim that you're Catholic, but you are clearly ignorant, an ignorant Catholic. You're one of those ignorant Catholics I was discussing earlier. What Vatican II did is 100% legitimate. It's 100% legitimate council. You are a schismatic. So these are extremely well-studied claims. No, these are extremely fallacious claims made by ignorant people. So the Ottaviani, now I was going to raise that in the future, but this is something that I said, people are going to say, well, no, but what popes do can be undone, blah, blah. Nonsense. Nonsense. There are too many poorly educated Catholics, badly educated Catholics. You are marking yourselves as one. So that's all you are. So enough of your conspiracy theorizing, enough of your nonsense. This is all very clear. Martin Luther lied through his teeth about the Catholic Church. The SSPX lie through their teeth. This is what they do. They know full well. The SSPX knows full well it is in rebellion. They know full well they are going against church doctrine. I've shown that from 2 different chapters of SSPX. They know very well what they're doing. They are being deliberate. So, yeah. Would I consider interviewing Father James Maudsley? James Maudsley talks out of his ass. Let him know I said that. I've listened to that guy and he's talking bullshit. Thanks. So, now. So, anyway, but no thanks. I don't need to listen to Father James Maudsley because I don't need to listen to more trash. Right. So, what is indeed? Let me see. Okay, Ora says, I do have issues with the formulation of Vatican II in some statements, but I don't have the authority to reject it. That can only be done by a future pope or council. Exactly so. So let me see. Ignatius says, this is great talk, thank you. Even as a Catholic, this is making me see how easily even I myself can fall into disobedience and try to force my own desires onto the church. Yeah, well, this is pretty common, oddly enough. So Pope Paul to Lefebvre, what is at issue is the question, which must be truly called fundamental, of your refusal to recognize the authority of the Second Vatican Council. That's your Pope. Now, this is, unless you all, this is to Byron here, whatever, Unless you want to call a whole bunch of popes, including Pope Paul VI, a complete ignoramus, right? But what is decided by the Pope and by the Council, by the Magisterium, is valid and binding, and you just have to like it. It's as simple as that. Right, so the refusal is accompanied by an action oriented towards propagating and organizing what must be called rebellion. Is it necessary to remind you that you are our brother in the episcopate, and moreover, a fact that obliges you to remain even more closely united to the See of Peter. One thing that is notable here is that the Catholic Church, when dealing with Lefebvre, was very gracious. Their language was always very, very gracious. But let's just say that was not reciprocated, right? So you're obliged to remain even more closely united to the See of Peter, that you have been named an assistant at the papal throne. Christ has given the supreme authority in his church to Peter and to the apostolic college, that is, to the Pope and to the college of the bishops. In regard to the Pope, every Catholic admits that the words of Jesus to Peter determine also the charge of Peter's legitimate successors. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Feed my sheep and confirm your brethren. And the First Vatican Council specified in these terms the assent due to the sovereign pontiff. Now, exactly, you've got people who, at Vatican I, decided, oh my God, the church has been taken over by evil communists, and they've been infected by the, take your pick of conspiracy theories, and therefore we're going to start the SSPX Old Catholic Church. And then Vatican II, oh my God, the church has been infected by communists and by modernists. We're going to start the SSPX Original Latin Mass Catholic Church. Oh my God, the Catholic Church has been taken over by Satanists. We're going to start the Protestant Church. Oh my God, the Catholic Church has been taken over by Satanists and the Antichrist, and we're going to start the Arian Church. Oh my God, the Catholic Church is corrupt, and we're going to start the Satanic Gnostic Catholic Church. And there are hundreds of movements like this throughout history. I mean, it is amazing how long that list is, and everyone has an excuse. So yeah, I'm not buying anyone else's story right now. And the First Vatican Council specified in these terms the assent due to the sovereign pontiff. And this is from Vatican I. The pastors of every rank and of every rite, and the faithful, each separately and all together, are bound by the duty of hierarchical subordination and of true obedience, not only in questions of faith and morals, but also in those that touch upon the discipline and government of the church throughout the entire world. Thus, by preserving the unity of communion and profession of faith with the Roman pontiff, the church is a single flock under one pastor. Such is the doctrine of Catholic truth, from which no one can separate himself without the danger for his faith and salvation. That's the Dogmatic Constitution, Pastor Aeternus, chapter 3. And this is from a book called Pope, the Council on the Mass, Answers to Questions the Traditionalists Have Asked. Did Lefebvre call the Vatican II popes the Antichrist? I'm not sure. He had some nasty things to say. I know the SSPX hasn't always been very complimentary, but Luther did. The Reformers certainly did. And it's explicit within various of the Reformation confessions. So like Augsburg and Westminster and so on, they literally explicitly, in several of these, call the Pope the Antichrist. Pope Leo X, I believe, at the time of Martin Luther, was called the Antichrist. Now, of course, we haven't seen any of this Antichrist stuff happen. Revelation has not come true, but this doesn't stop them from making the claim today, 160 popes later. So either they are, I mean, it's like if they keep lying about you, at some point in the future, maybe they'll be right, or maybe they're just lying and should really just stop. Porfirio says, reform the church within the boundaries of the church, not outside of it. And that much is very true. If you want to fix the problems that are going on, don't disobey what is lawful and legitimate and valid. Exactly. So let me see. Okay, so to go on. Okay, letter of Pope Paul VI to Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. I'll just bring the highlights. The unbearable irregularity of your present position. Lefebvre is not on good ground, right? Sorry, my nose is itching. It's change of season, and it's happening again. Sorry. Good grief. Hay fever. He speaks of the unbearable irregularity of a present position. It is not in accordance with truth and justice. It arrogates itself the right to declare that our apostolic ministry departs from the rule of the faith. Of course, so did old Byron, or whatever his name was earlier. He also, Byron Noy, he's also claiming, Byron Noyd, right? He's also claiming that he can cast judgment and he can go against papal decree, but whatever. And to judge as unacceptable the teachings of an ecumenical council celebrated according to perfect observance of ecclesiastical norms. These are extremely serious accusations. Your position is not according to the gospel and according to the faith. To persist in this path would be a grave damage to your sacred person and to those who would follow you as a guide in disobedience to canon laws. Have the humility, brother, and the courage to break the illogical chain that makes you alien and hostile to the church. Hopefully, just from that little bit, okay, you'll find that the church, the Catholic Church and the popes were really graceful towards the SSPX. They were really careful in their language and really open and humble. And of course, this is rarely reciprocated. Even you can see with Martin Luther, right? You'll find that the man was extremely venomous, hateful, and that's putting it mildly. So let me see. No, the SSPX, you probably find individuals in SSPX to do so with more general antichrist. No, the SSPX did not. Yeah, there may be individuals. Yeah, true. A statement by an individual, like for instance, you take a look at the whole indulgences myth, that, shall we say, the overblown indulgences story, the pretext that is used for the starting of the Reformation, right? That's a financial issue. Indulgence abuses by Tetzel. The thing is, that's one guy. That is not necessarily a widespread issue. It's one guy. You've got one guy that always comes up. Yeah, this guy's doing abuses. Okay, so he is, and there's always going to be some guy stealing out of the cash register. And does that mean that that's the norm at the company? Does that mean that that's the standard practice, or did you just catch one guy doing it? So imagine you have one guy that's doing indulgences, and you say, well, to fix this problem of one guy taking money, what we need to do is we need to chop several books out of the Bible. We've got to get rid of all the sacraments. We've got to demote all the church fathers. We've got to get rid of the bishops. We've got to get rid of we've just got to make me in charge of the church. And then we've also got to strip all iconography. I thought you had a financial problem, but no. See, so what happens is these are just pretexts that are used to impose their vision, their view of the church. And this does happen a lot. Let me continue here. I believe SSPX position is recognize and resist. They recognize the Pope, but where's the logic? Yeah, well, it's pride. It's their own pride. And declared by the congregation 1 July, at the same time declared as of today's date, the decree issued. The text is of the lifting. Yes, von Nobody, I've actually covered this at length in the past. This is not the very first time I've discussed the whole issue of the SSPX and the Catholic position. This particular slide deck is over 100 slides. And this is not the only one I have. I've actually covered this in the past as well. I've actually done this at length. And yes, I know all of this. I've actually covered this at length. Lefebvre's excommunication was not lifted. Was not. Deal with it, okay? Now, moving on. This means Lefebvre is not excommunicated. No, only the 4 bishops. Now, von Nobody, I don't know if you are being deliberate or if you are simply just being hasty and not doing your homework correctly. The 4 bishops had their excommunication lifted, not Lefebvre. Now, let me know if you simply have failed to do the necessary homework, or if you are sloppy, or if you are lying, okay? Failed to do homework, sloppy, lying. Pick one, let me know in the chat, okay? Something else I've heard is that an exorcist said that demons don't care if you're a heretic or defender of orthodoxy, as long as they can make your soul fall away from the faith. Yeah, that would seem accurate. Silver says, sorry, Lloyd, forgive me. I want to watch it, but I have the Charlie Kirk memorial on. Thanks. No worries. I understand that, Silver. No worries. Okay. But did you see the report that there's the one Catholic magazine, Charlie Kirk was actually did a service at a particular Catholic church. And then he stated, there's a report that he actually said to a Catholic priest or something. I haven't read the report. I just saw the headlines and a couple of comments on it. So I haven't, but He said he was this close to becoming Catholic to someone to a priest, I believe. So even Charlie Kirk. Now, I know Charlie Kirk at one point, I believe, said some things about the Pope and about Catholic doctrine that was just wrong. I mean, the guy was very smart, clearly, really capable guy, very, very intelligent, very well read, extremely well spoken. But on that issue, I mean, he was factually wrong when he spoke about that, assuming that the quote that I read was actually said by him. But yeah, because there's lots of things said and so on. But on that point, when he spoke of that, he was completely and utterly wrong. And yeah, unfortunately, we can't correct him now on that point. But yeah, even someone as capable as he can fail to do homework and just follow the narrative. But anyway, there's a possibility that he may well have become Catholic. So, Oeretics, the Lord is correct. The liftings for the other bishops, not Lefebvre. For nobody. Yeah, so for nobody, let me know. Failed to do your homework, you were sloppy, or you're just trying to deceive us. Okay. No man is right all the time. Yeah, exactly. We all make mistakes. We all misspeak. We all say things badly, phrase things badly, make a typo. Yes, it happens. Obviously, you don't want to try and make it a habit or consistent, but yeah, we all, I mean, all of us are going to say something out of, that's not fully correct at some point, or just outright wrong. Schismatic dissenters. So I don't want to go too long, another 15 minutes at most. Based on Catholic doctrine, the SSPX are schismatics or dissenters within the church. I will cover more detail, but I rewrote my whole SSPX Catholic Church thing from the ground up because I wanted to, I don't know, just lay these foundations. I just felt, okay, so the SSPX are schismatics and dissenters. The key points are, we need to take away, they reject church authority. So schism involves rebelling against the bishop of the diocese and not submitting to the Pope or to be in communion with the members of the church subject to him. Schismatics obstinately rejects a teaching that the Roman Pontiff or the College of Bishops exercising the authentic magisterium have set forth to be held definitively. That's where the SSPX are. They put personal opinion over the magisterium. Martin Luther became his own pope. He became the head of his church with nothing to stop him, right? That's incredible pride. So the references condemn the tendency to regard a judgment as having all the more validity to the extent that it proceeds from the individual relying upon his own powers. Where two or three are gathered, right? Where there's a council. Then you have the Holy Spirit, and these people are operating in good faith. Of course, the Catholic Church is not, at least within Protestant polemics, accorded any good faith whatsoever, right? In fact, it's quite hateful rhetoric going back historically and even today. That said, this is exactly what you're looking at Luther and Calvin and all the reformers. This was their own personal pride. The Holy Spirit's talking to me, therefore I cannot be wrong. Therefore, only me. And freedom of judgment, understood in this way, is more important than the truth itself. That's a brilliant point here. That's a really brilliant point that is made here. This is from certain documents. These references are point 2, point 6, paragraph 2, paragraph 6, within a document that I'm quoting from the Catholic Church. But they regarded judgment being more valid when it proceeds from their own mind. And freedom of judgment, understood in this way, is more important than the truth itself. Yep, that's Luther and the Reformation right there. This is contrasted with the duty to hearken to him, the magisterium, reverently when he speaks and carries out what he says. So Catholics need to be obedient. You may not like it, but you have to do it. You may not understand something, you may not know something, but you are not the pinnacle of the church. You need to be obedient to the church. That's just the way it is within the Catholic Church. Of course, within the Protestant Church, it's like sola scriptura, right? I read the Bible and the Holy Spirit told me that the sky is yellow with green spots. Can't argue with the Holy Spirit, now can we? Slandering the papacy. So the references described by schismatics, okay, can arise from rival popes, each gathering round himself a following and denouncing that of his rival, which would involve slandering the true papacy. So all of these people, looking at the reformers, looking at the SSPX and other groups, other schismatic groups, the sedevacantists and whatnot, they all set themselves up as authority and then they slander the Pope. That's just another day ending in Y. Nothing special. This is what they all do. Therefore, so the individuals, okay, sorry, this was the AI just dissecting this for me. These are schismatics or dissenters who have separated themselves from the unity of the church and they've prioritized their own personal opinions over the teaching of the church. It's as simple as that. This comes down to pride. The Catholic Church is a 2,000-year-old organization. They've lasted a long time successfully with the same doctrine. When I go through the history, when I listen to the doctrine, when I read the Church Fathers, it's all the same. Whereas, the story you would hear from, let's say, the rest of YouTube, Protestant YouTube, is a distortion of that. Okay, so let me see. Smart does not mean you can't be wrong. For sure, man, I'm wrong on a lot of things. Okay, so let's continue. Congregation for Bishops' Monition by the blah, blah. This is 1988. Since on June 15, 1988, you stated that you intended to ordain 4 priests to the episcopate without having obtained the mandate of the Pope as required by Canon 1013 of the Code of Canon Law, I convey to you this public canonical warning, confirming that if you carry out your intention, you and also the bishops shall incur excommunication. Okay, so this is very clear. He was told, right? He and his people were told, and they did. Lefebvre, it was not merely about the Latin Mass. He claimed that if he did not go through with these illicit consecrations, the faith would not be preserved. You saw that claim earlier by Mr. Byron Noib, whatever that. No, they are preserving the true faith. He's simply repeating the Lefebvre line, that if we don't do this, we won't preserve the true faith. Martin Luther said it, Arius said it, all the Gnostics said it. There isn't a single heretic that doesn't say that. They're preserving the true faith. How many Protestant denominations, I've covered in my video on conspiracy Christianity, which is about the Great Awakening or whatever it was, the Great Apostasy, sorry, about the dozens of groups you've never heard of, the most random, arbitrary names and groups who all claim that they are the original apostolic church. Totally contradictory doctrines, completely opposite views. None of them can prove in any way or shape or form they are first century Christians, but they all claim to be, and they are preserving the true faith. They restored the true faith. In fact, they restored the true faith. They restored the true faith. Hundreds of groups have made this claim. The faith of the church depended on him consecrating bishops in defiance of the Pope and church law. Ad Apostolorum Principis Pius XII, 1958. Pope Pius XII says, I hear all around me innovators who want to dismantle the Holy Chapel, destroy the universal flame of the church, throw away her ornaments, give her a remorse of her historical past. Well, my dear friend, I have the conviction that the Church of Peter must assume her past, or she will dig her own grave. Okay, now, oddly enough, there's no evidence for this quote. Now, well known are the terms of Vatican Council's solemn definition, relying on the open testimony of the scriptures and abiding by the wise and clear decrees both of our predecessors, the Roman pontiffs and the general councils, we renew the definition of the Ecumenical Council of Florence, by virtue of which all the faithful must believe that the Holy Apostolic See and the Roman pontiff hold primacy over the whole world, and the Roman pontiff himself is the successor of the blessed Peter, and continues to be the true vicar of Christ and head of the whole church, the father and teacher of all Christians, and to him is the blessed Peter, our Lord Jesus Christ, committed the full power of caring for, ruling, and governing the universal church. Now, someone would have given me this quote, and I cannot find this quote. There's no evidence this was actually said. Sergeant Grinch says, if I wasn't ignorant and seeking knowledge, I wouldn't be here. Thanks, Lord. Well, I do appreciate the time and the attention, Grinch. Conociendo, did you read about the Hebrew roots of the Torah followers? Dude, I vaguely, I just cannot remember, so I can't comment. I would need to go and do some reading and research before I can comment on that. Yeah, so, but that's from Pope Pius XII. Okay, so yeah, are we making sense of far? So I'll finish on page 25 here. I think that's a good place to stop. Popes are the head of the church. Christ is the invisible head of the church, while the Pope, as the successor of St. Peter, is the visible head of the church militant on earth. They constitute one head, as the church has taught from the very beginning. The Pope, the Bishop of Rome, is the visible head of the church because he is the successor of St. Peter, whom Christ made the chief apostle and the visible head of the church. The church has one ruler and governor, the invisible one, Christ. Now notice this stands in very stark contrast to Protestant claims that the Pope and the councils, the magisteriums, have stood over Christ. They've imposed themselves over the Bible. Now, of course, that is a claim that Martin Luther made, and it is based upon this statement by St. Augustine, that St. Augustine would not believe the gospel except that he was moved to do so by the authority of the Catholic Church. It is through the authority of the Church, because he believes in the Church, and the Church told him the gospel is true, therefore he believed the gospel. Otherwise, he would not believe that those books are the true inspired works of God, or books written by men about God. So the idea is that, sorry, I lost my thread there. I've lost my thread there, but anyway, Augustine believes that the Church is foundational. The claim is that the Church has tried to impose itself over and above, that the Pope imposes himself over and above Jesus and the Bible. But no, the difference is that the Catholic Church makes it very clear they are a witness to and the messenger that brings the Bible. Also, the oral traditions were written down and recorded. That's the Bible. But there are certain traditions that are not fully recorded, as we know from the Church Fathers. I've covered that. So there's an attempt, a very strong effort to invert and distort that reality. But the Catholic Church does make very simple, very easily understood claims, right? There's the invisible head of the Church and the visible head of the Church. And it doesn't claim that it stands over the Bible or above the Bible. No, it says, this is the word of God, and we are simply the messenger spreading that word of God. And of course, the whole reform movement is to shoot the messenger and impose a new one. The visible head of the Pope is necessary to establish and preserve the unity of the Church as taught by the fathers of the Church. Just as Peter was made the head of the Apostolic College and the foundation upon which the Church is built, so the successor to Peter, the Roman Pontiff, is the visible head of the College of Bishops and the entire people of God. Of course, the claim that there's an invisible Church, that's also another fake claim that also died out because they couldn't prove it. And it does come back. Of course, there are people who still stand on these old myths and ideas. The Pope, as the Vicar of Christ, is the perpetual, visible source and foundation of the unity of the Church with full, supreme, immediate, and universal power. Christ and his Vicar, the Pope, constitute one only head of the Church, as taught by Pope Boniface VIII and his successors. So any claims to the contrary do not depict the Catholic Church's teachings, and to say otherwise is anathema. Right, I think this is not from Trent. Let me just figure out where this is from. Sorry, let me just try and get to the original quote. Page 25. Let me just see where I got that from. Catechism of the Christian Doctrine, that's the Baltimore Catechism. And then the Catechism of the Council of Trent. And the Compendium of the Catholic Catechism, as well as Mystici Corporis Christi. So that's a compendium of different statements made through these. Okay, so where am I? So hopefully this has made a little bit of sense. I'm well aware that many of these things, obviously there's lots of people on different sides of it. Some of them have done very poor history, done very poor reading, will make all sorts of claims. These claims need evidence to back them up. There needs to be solid history, there needs to be logic. And also the issue with Father Maudsley is that a lot of people have told me, you got to listen to Father Maudsley, you got to watch Father Maudsley, you got to blah, blah, blah. I've watched Father Maudsley, I've listened to Father Maudsley, and I came to the conclusion Father Maudsley should really just sit down and be quiet. So anyway, that will be that. So I'll continue. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll talk about Martin Luther, and that's another topic. And we're actually going to see some really interesting quotes by Martin Luther. He makes the most arrogant statements, the most seriously arrogant statements. And I don't know where he gets the authority he thinks he has. So that'll be interesting, and I'll continue with this. I'll do this sort of once a week and try and finish this and do some more discussions on the Catholic Church. So I'll end it here tonight, and thank you very much for your time. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care. God bless.